What if the world we wander through is nothing more than the echo of our thinking, shaped like a landscape by the cartography of mind? We inherit habits of thought as if they were weather, some days heavy with storm, some mornings clear and bright. Yet rarely do we notice that it is thought that has sown the clouds and built the horizon. From the first flicker of desire to the long, stubborn coil of resentment, every inner form sculpts the outer scene. The Dhammapada's opening line does not announce a doctrine so much as a discovery. Our attention fashions the room in which we live. To see this is to face a responsibility that is at once liberating and grave. What we tend grows. What we neglect withers. Imagine a gardener who roams an overgrown plot, believing the weeds are strangers, when in truth they are offspring of neglect. With each thought untended, another root spreads. Anxiety fans its leaves into a tree of fear. Malice plants thorns that prick the hand that reaches for peace. Conversely, a single deliberate thought, like a seed planted in deliberate soil, can begin a quiet revolution. Patience sends up shoots of calm. Compassion flowers into a canopy that shades old wounds. The inner work of cultivation is not ornamental philosophy, but an art of survival, a craft that determines whether our inner weather brings harvest or famine. Our modern minds have become miners, excavating for meaning in schedules, achievements, and the accumulation of facts. We wear a miner's helmet of seriousness, blinkered and compact, convinced that the next discovery will justify the toil. Yet the deepest riches are not unearthed by force. They reveal themselves when we stop digging and allow the ground to show us what has been growing all along. Contemplation is not an escape from life's demands, but a reorientation of the tools we use, replacing the pickaxe with a trowel, the hurry with attentive touch. Thought is not merely transactional. It has an ontology, a way of being that co-creates reality. When our thoughts assume control, they sculpt an identity that insists on continuity. The injured self, the clever mind, the lonely heart. These identities demand allegiance. We think them into permanence and then act surprised when the world responds as though our creeds were commands. To notice this is to disentangle from the narrative habit, to see thoughts as weather passing across the awareness rather than as the bedrock of being. Attention is the hinge through which everything turns. When we place it with care, the very grammar of our inner language shifts. Wondrously small gestures, resting the mind on breath, letting a judgment pass like a cloud, watching a memory without adding commentary, change the climate of experience. They do not engineer dramatic transformations overnight, but they alter the slope of habit. A downward spiral loosens into a gentle valley. A habitual impatience softens into toleration. There is a long, patient alchemy here. Repeated acts of mindful seeing transmute the lead of reactivity into the gold of presence. Ethics in this view becomes ontological. To think kindly is not merely to be virtuous. It is to bring into being a world where kindness can flourish. When anger dominates, the world narrows. When generosity becomes the default architecture of thought, doors open. Relationships loosen their tight seams. Opportunities shimmer where none seem possible. Responsibility for thought is therefore not a burden to be resented, but a stewardship we accept with humility. Our inner state ripples outward in patterns that become the very weather other lives must weather. And yet, the teaching is tender, not tyrannical. It asks not for perfection, but for fidelity, to notice, to return, to tend. We will stumble. Old grooves of rumination will reassert themselves like footpaths trodden deep. The practice is to find, again and again, the path back to the simple, waking gaze that watches without immediate judgment. In that watching is liberation. Thoughts lose their dictatorial tone and reveal themselves as passing visitors in a vast hall of awareness. So as we stand in this garden of present thought, the question blooms like a late-night flower. What if the world we most urgently need to change is the room inside our skull? And what if the means to change it is as humble as the manner in which we attend? If the next step is not to travel farther, but to see closer, what will you choose to water first?
If the next step is not to travel farther, but to see closer, what will you choose to water first? The question settles like morning mist over an orchard. Rows of potential, saplings of habit, and older trees heavy with fruit or rot, all awaiting the quiet economy of attention. In the space between thought and response, there is a small but decisive economy. A choice not of willpower alone, but of the manner in which we dwell with what arises. To water a thought is not merely to indulge it, it is to permit its root to take hold and organize the landscape of experience around it. Consider the mind as an orchard whose soil remembers every footstep taken upon it. Some paths compact the earth, making it hard for new shoots to emerge. Other routes are soft and irrigated, welcoming seedlings of gentleness. Habit is a kind of irrigation system. The channels of repeated attention direct life towards certain groves and away from others. When worry is fed, its branches lengthen into anxious canopies under which light finds it difficult to pass. When curiosity is tended, it blossoms into vines that entwine with novelty and invite vistas previously unseen. There is an anatomy to this tending. Thoughts arrive as weather. Sudden gusts, lingering clouds, gentle rains. Each mental climate leaves a trace in the soil of perception. Anger, like a flash drought, dries the surface and makes the world brittle. Compassion, like steady rain, softens barriers and allows roots to exchange. Neither state is permanent, yet both leave impressions that shape the next season. The skillful gardener of inner life learns to notice these microclimates without identifying wholly with them, observing where moisture gathers and where the land has been salted by old resentments. This observation is not an abstract witnessing, but a refined form of participation. It requires attunement to the subtle textures of mind, the tug of a remembered slight, the shimmering of a small delight, the slow accretion of self-justifying narratives. When attention leans toward a narrative it has been told about itself, the story thickens. When attention withdraws, the story thins into background noise, its authority diminished. Thus, attention is not a passive lens, but an active cultivator, shaping which seeds will find nourishment and which will remain dormant. Ethics emerges here as a practice of selection, not of moralistic policing, but of creative responsiveness. To hold thoughts with kindness is to choose soil for flourishing rather than for erosion. This does not deny the presence of darker shoots, envy, fear, regret, but it receives them with the same landscaper's eye that discerns whether a plant needs trimming, moving, or composting. Even compost has its purpose. Transformed pain can become rich humus for compassion. The ontological claim is simple and radical. To change the climate of being is to change the world we inhabit, because perception and world co-arise in an intimate loop. Language, too, acts as irrigation. The words we whisper to ourselves form canals. Sentences that begin with blame deepen gullies. Phrases of wonder widen the field. A single reframing can alter the slope of an entire grove. This is why contemplative practices do not merely aim at tranquility. They are techniques for remapping the network of attention, for training the eye to linger where life bears fruit and to pass more lightly where decay persists. Over time, the orchard's architecture shifts, and the seasons themselves seem kinder. But cultivation is never a project of erasure. The gardener knows the necessity of winter, the need for rest and collapse. Allowing certain thoughts to die back is as vital as tending those that grow. The loss of a favorite assumption can feel like pruning a beloved branch. Its absence is raw, and yet space opens for new shoots that would otherwise have no room to rise. Thus, renunciation is not denial, but reordering. The removal of overripe beliefs so fresh growth may be possible. There is finally a humility to this tending. No gardener controls the rain, the pest, or the sun. What can be stewarded is attention, the manner in which one listens to the inner weather and responds with patience, discrimination, and softness. The promise implicit in such stewardship is not mastery, but participation, the slow recognition that the mind's horizon is malleable, and that by caring for our patterns of thought, we alter the very soil from which our world grows. So the orchard waits, neither judging nor pleading, only bearing the possibilities of harvest and fallow. In its rows, the old maps of identity are rewritten in small gestures. A habitual suspicion watered anew with curiosity, a self-reproach composted into tenderness, an anxious forecast answered with a simple recording of breath. Each tending folds inward and outward, shaping inner climate and changing the view beyond. When the day comes to choose, which sapling will you receive your attention first? The one calling for apology? The one thirsting for gratitude? Or the one whose leaves tremble with something unnamed? Which sapling will you water first? The one thirsting for apology? The one leaning toward gratitude? Or the small, unnamed shoot that trembles with the secret light? The question hangs in the orchard air like late summer heat, decisive and soft at once. When we bend to tend, we discover that tending itself rewrites the story of who we are. The act of attention is not a narrow tool, but a formative weather, and the harvest that follows is not only fruit, but the very tone of our inner sky. Take a step back into the rows. See how attention sculpts the space. Where curiosity has been watered, vines climb toward play and discovery. Where resentment has been fed, brambles thicken into impassable hedges. The orchard is not indifferent. It responds with subtle fidelity. A single change of habit, allowing a harsh thought to pass without becoming a scaffold for further judgments, creates a microclimate. The wind shifts and light finds a path it could not before. This is the modest miracle of practice. not a sudden overhaul, but a patient rearrangement of conditions so that new forms may arise. There is a seasonality to inner care. Some efforts bear fruit quickly. A moment of listening, a small offered kindness, a choice to soften a narrative. Other transformations require the patient composting of grief into understanding, the long dissolution of a defensive self into malleable presence. The gardener learns to trust both cycles. She prunes with compassion, knowing that even a blunt cut preserves the tree. She lets the rot become humus, fertile and generous. In this sacrament of attention, failure is not failure, but substrate. What we call relapse becomes the compost of future clarity. Observe how language tends the soil. The stories we repeat are irrigation canals. Repeated claims harden into channels that only certain waters can traverse. I am always anxious, a refrain, channels fear through every moment like a narrow river. Replace the chant with a different phrasing, softer, truer, and the water spreads differently, moistening other roots. There is tension now. I can notice it. This small linguistic shift is surgical and tender, loosening a compacted path so light can reach the seeds beneath. Thought, therefore, is not merely reflex. It is formative grammar. To change the grammar of inner speech is to change the climate of being. Ethics in this field is intimate and elegant. It is not offered as a law but as a practice of cultivation. To prefer kinder thoughts, to hold anger with the same curious care we extend to joy, to recognize that each habit of mind ceases to be an abstraction when it becomes soil from which action grows. The moral life stops being a ledger of right and wrong and becomes a horticulture of the heart. When compassion is the dominant crop, the orchard's borders blur. Our world becomes more porous to others, more generous with surprise. And yet, the deepest teaching is paradoxical. The more we attempt to control our mind, the more brittle the garden may become. Rigidity breeds a brittle harvest. The wise cultivator learns the art of non-grasping attention, a deliberate softness that allows emergence without forcing form. Presence is a paradoxical gardening technique. It does not micromanage growth, but offers steady conditions, light, water, gentle space, and then watches wonders unfold. This surrender is not resignation, but an intelligent yielding, an acknowledgement that life responds best to fidelity rather than dominance. Now imagine the orchard at dusk, bathed in an early blue light. The day's labor has been simple and exacting, moments of noticing, choosing language, releasing rancor, watering curiosity. The trees lean like elders, their leaves whispering. In the hush, each fruit seems less a possession than an offering, a ripe tenderness, a new appetite for presence, a steadier capacity to meet sorrow without collapsing into reactivity. The harvest is quieter than triumph. It is the soft habit of being less startled, more present, more capable of holding both loss and joy without being undone. This is the culmination of the arc we began. Thought shapes the world, and world shapes the next thought. The loop is not fate, but ecology, responsive, mutable, intimate. We are not passive fields to be ravaged by external weather. We are the gardener who learns to read clouds and speaks to the soil. Responsibility here is luminous rather than burdensome, a recognition that the manner in which we think has consequences not only for our mood, but for the texture of our days and the very horizon of meaning that frames our lives. If there is a final linkage to carry from these rows, Let it be of hands cupped around a small, luminous fruit, warm, unassuming, humming with the latent sweetness of a life attended. It is the fruit of small, repeated acts, a softened phrase, a moment of noticing breath, a choice to water curiosity rather than fear. The fruit tastes of simple presence and carries seed for future orchards. So the orchard waits, patient and alive, only asking for the gentle economy of attention. In tending it, we do not become masters of fate, but faithful stewards of possibility. In that stewardship, the great promise lies that by caring for our thinking, we alter the horizon of sense. And in that altered horizon, peace and conflict find new relations, and the inner world we inhabit becomes a place where the harvest is ever more kindly, ever more true.